Israel Update with Gadi Tao and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. We postponed the recording of this show because it was supposed to be recorded on Election Day, and nobody had patience for such things as Israel on Election Day, not even Israelis, as you will soon learn. And so we're recording on a Thursday. It's the 7th of November, which means it is exactly 1 year and 1 month since Iron Swords began. The producer of this show is Yaakov Wilner, and it's hosted by Gadi Tao in Tel Aviv and his assistants in the warehouse in DC, Mike Duran. Mike, are you there?
I am here. So I've been downgraded to your assistant, huh?
Yeah, because the headquarters, we got tired of this here in Israel.
Oh.
Now
we did. Now, am I your intern?
Yeah. So, based on performance, you may be able to continue.
That reminds me of a story I'll tell you some other time. Based on performance. If you remind me based on performance, I'll tell you something funny someday. Okay.
You can't do this to our viewers and listeners.
No, I want to.
I'll screen it later.
We need to tantalize them with it.
So there was a collective sigh of relief among half the population in Israel. No, three quarters of the population. It's just that the press was a little dour about the victory of Trump. So many here.
Dour. It was dour.
How? Dour.
Dour. Yeah. If you're gonna call me your assistant, if you're gonna call me your assistant or your intern, I'm gonna interrupt you and correct every pronunciation.
In that case, I'll call you my Grammarly assistant. Can't you have the same sound for the same vowels like in different words? It's horrible.
I know it's the thing that.
So anyway, they were chamutzim. You know, Netanyahu once said this about the opposition: chamutzim, sour. And ever since, a lot of leftists say he's been inciting against the left because he told them they're sour. So a lot of I was really greatly relieved, and people here said maybe maybe we will have a better chance to do what we have been talking about in this show for a long time. And I suspect there was also one woman in Washington, D.C. who was greatly relieved. Her name is Kamala Harris. I'm sure she's, whoa, that was a close call. She just dodged that bullet. That's the way she looked to me for
she
the whole race.
I was over in the Czech Republic before, about 2 weeks before the election, and they asked me, everyone of course was saying who's going to win, and I was sitting on a stage, and I have not been expressing a lot of opinions about American politics to people for all kinds of reasons for a long time, and I hadn't even been allowing myself to think much about it. But anyway, I just blurted out that it's going to be Trump in a landslide, and I kind of surprised myself when I said it. And it wasn't based on a real scientific, investigation of the polling or anything like that. But what I was reading, and I think I read it correctly in the end, was her and how much she just did not really believe that she could be president. She never ever convinced me that she truly thought that she could be president, and she just got there completely by accident, sort of being there. And in the end, the electorate, there are lots of reasons why they rejected her, but that's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, I think she was chosen for being a non-entity in a sense. And my first tweet after that, I don't know if you saw it or if you would approve, was I guess you would approve if it turned out to be true. Obama's era is over. And in Israel, this is sort of a joke because Amnon Abramovich, I think it was what 2000. It was the end of the first Netanyahu government, so it must have been 99. and Amnon Abramovich, the pundit, the senior pundit on Channel 2, said, Tam Idan Netanyahu. It's the end of the Netanyahu era. And he added, Netanyahu is going to leave the stage of history with not even a footnote. And here he is. So, you know, Yinon Magal, your favorite host on the Patriotim show, whenever there is something, there is a new scandal, and we will talk about the new scandal, whenever it's cleared, he teases Ben Caspit with Tamidan Netanyahu. It's the end of the Netanyahu era once again. But I think it may well be. So I wanted to contribute something to the Babylon Bee in the spirit of the election in the United States, a story that would be headed, the headline would be, Kamala Harris blames defeat on Donald Trump. It's also true.
Not bad. Not bad. I heard an interview with Maxine Waters this morning, the veteran Democratic politician, and she basically, that was basically her analysis. Like everything in Babylon Bee, it's so true. It's funny.
Yeah.
All right, should we get to the news here?
Yeah, let's get to the news.
I've got on the news. I've only got three things, and they're also the three things that we should be talking about. So on Sunday night, Gadi, an Israeli court permitted publication of the names or the name of the primary suspect in a severe security affair that is roiling Israeli politics. His name is Eli Feldstein. The court also permitted publication of the names of the fact that four other suspects had also been arrested, some of whom hail from the defense establishment. The investigation was launched after there was a suspicion that classified and sensitive information was removed from the IDF, information that was liable to severely damage state security and to endanger information sources and to undermine the ability of the security agencies to obtain the release of the hostages. That's how it's being explained. I suspect you have a different understanding of the matter. The court noted that during the investigation, all of those suspicions that I just mentioned had been significantly reinforced. I'm very much looking forward to your interpretation of this, Gadi. So on Tuesday, as you noted, there was a presidential election in the United States, and Donald Trump won. He becomes only the second president to win a non-sequential second term.
After Grover Cleveland.
After Grover Cleveland. That's the only thing I know about Grover Cleveland, by the way. Also, on Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu fired Defense Minister Gallant, and he announced that Gallant would be replaced by Foreign Minister Israel Katz, who in turn would be replaced by Gideon Sa'ar.
Yeah.
Netanyahu's decision spurred tens of thousands of Israelis to head into the streets in protest. Were you among them, Gadi?
No, tens of thousands. Yeah.
Okay. The large numbers of protesters into the streets and the decision was decried by opposition chairman Yair Lapid as quote unquote an act of madness. Gallant's ouster is broadly perceived in the media as being part of a two-pronged plan. I suspect you're not going to agree with this, Gadi. One, to shore up the coalition by passing legislation that would sweepingly exempt Haredi men from military conscription. And two, to fire Chief of Staff Halevi, Shabak Director Barr, and other top security officials, so that Netanyahu can consolidate his hold on power. And that, Gadi, is so that when there's an investigation into the causes of October 7th, so the press is telling us, the political echelon will be strengthened over the professional echelon, and will be able to exonerate itself. That's the interpretation being put out in the media. I suggest you have a different take. Over to you.
I do, but first, whenever
I suspect you have a different take.
You have to be careful with numbers of demonstrations, because as I learned as a veteran Peace Now demonstrator in my youth, the media reports limbs, not heads. So it's always it's always quadrupled, but even that is no longer the case. They now report fingers and toes. So when they say tens of thousands, it may well mean thousands. And I suspect not even that this time. We will speak about this later when we talk about Gallant, but everybody was waiting for a second Gallant night, because the Gallant night is what halted judicial reform in the Mesozoic era before the war, when Gallant took the lead of the forces that threatened to tear Israel apart if the reform continues. So there's a prehistory to the Gallant affair. But Mike, why don't we start with the meaning of the election? Because this is everybody feels that this is a true historic moment, and I feel we can't discuss it without saying something about what it means for America. And since you are my American intern, why don't we start there? What do you think the meaning of the election is broadly?
I think it is indeed historic. I think it is huge. Trump has remade the Republican Party. He's created a new coalition, and the full extent of it we have yet to understand, and I think it's still developing. But it really is a seismic shift, a seismic and I think permanent shift. You just look at some of the numbers that we saw. A huge turnout for Trump among Hispanics. The number I saw, I haven't checked this. As I mentioned, I'm not a expert on all the polls and the American public and everything. But the number I've seen in the press is 45% of the Hispanic vote. He got about that 45%, 46%. I can't remember what the number was, of the Jewish vote in New York. More broadly, I think they're putting the Jewish vote in general at around 33% or so, but 40 some odd percent in New York, which is, just a few years ago, would have been unheard of. And it's not just that they voted Republican; they voted for Donald Trump. You know that yesh bo mashu lo me'am yehudi. There's something in Trump not of the Jewish people. When you talk to Jews about Trump, even ones who are voting for it, it's always with a little bit of discomfort, distaste, and so on. So that the Hispanics rejected Trump in those numbers. Obviously, they still have the majority of Hispanics went for the Democrats, but not a large majority. This comes after, you may recall, a day or two before the election, a comedian made made a joke in very bad taste at the Madison Square Garden rally, where he called Puerto Rico an island of garbage. He was joking, but it was picked up as a serious comment and to reflecting the racism of Donald Trump. It was all over the airwaves completely for 2 days, and it had no impact, no perceivable impact on the Hispanic vote.
That was something I actually guessed, because for a long time, the way I see it, and this is an Israeli perspective, obviously, although, there are Americans who interpret it this way, and especially Batya Unger-Sargon, whom I hosted on my Hebrew podcast. She speaks Hebrew, by the way, like you. The identity politics supposedly represent the downtrodden and the oppressed, but they hide the class element. And so Donald Trump it's hard to explain to identity politics people, right? Because he's a billionaire, but he is the representative of the working class, as Batya has been saying. And so you see that all identity groups are also divided across class lines. And if you look at it from an Israeli perspective, it's the same thing. The left has become the party of the entrenched elites. And what they call, with the spies, populism, is actually democracy, is actually the vote of the many who seek to have a part in sovereignty, while elites are trying to marginalize them culturally and also economically. So I think that when you look at what's going on in Israel and you look what's going on in the United States, there is as different as these two people are, Trump and Netanyahu, they represent the same phenomena and also the same stamina to keep fighting against those powerful elites, because Donald Trump it's a phenomenon. It's not just,
it's the same. You see it globally. I think Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey, Netanyahu in Israel, Orban in Hungary, Le Pen in
Meloni in Italy,
Meloni in Italy. It's all the same thing.
Yeah,
it's all the same thing, and it's a nationalism versus globalism,
national democracy, because it's also
national. Yeah.
And here's my point, Mike. Here's my point, and this is where I meet our friend John Fonte, whom I admire, as you know. On the one side, there is national democracy, and on the other side, there is anti-democratic liberalism or pseudo-liberalism or progressivism. But the point is that these people who speak in the name of human rights and the downtrodden and identity politics are anti-democratic, and they're trying to marginalize, disenfranchise the lower classes while exercising tokenism with their identity politics. I wish we could talk about that more. This is my favorite subject. But we need to move on.
But let me say a couple things about it before we move on.
And then Iran, Mike. Yeah.
Then we'll go to Iran. One of the things is that they believe their ideology. They are absolutely captured by it, and this relates to their foreign policy as much as their domestic policy. They believe that they represent the people and the best interests of the people. They fundamentally do not believe in the consent of the governed. This is what you're getting at. They believe in the managed society, but they believe that the well-managed society, they represent the interests of the working class people, even though they're unfamiliar with them truly. The traditional left wing ethos is still part of their worldview, but they don't actually live it in any real way, and they don't have any way to actually communicate and negotiate with the working class, because they just tell the working class what its interests are, which are to support them, and they have the media behind them. So just to finish our thoughts on this, Gadi, I think I do hope that this is the fall of Barack Obama. I do believe he is the most powerful person in American politics, or was. I think Donald Trump is now, but he was until yesterday. The most powerful person. I hope he leaves the scene. Kamala Harris clearly was a puppet of a democratic machine, which includes this media machine. And that, to me, one of the biggest losers and the most important losers of this election was the media machine. It was clearly 100% all in for Kamala Harris, with no reservations. Everyone understood that, and they rejected it.
Not exactly, because their fall began before the election results, and this was noticeable after the town hall that she did, and CNN began to criticize her, and you felt they are trying to save the last remnants of what they believe is their influence.
Oh, you're right. There are these little moments when they feel like they actually think they still think they have credibility, but they have lost the plot entirely. They have lost the plot. So look, Joe Rogan's podcast with Trump had 45 million downloads. Now, I don't know how many of those were American, but Joe Rogan's interview with Donald Trump had more impact than any other media event.
That's true for podcasts in general, our own included. I think we had an effect on the election, Mike. People realize,
of course, everybody knows that. That's why people are tuning in the millions, in the millions.
Exactly. So you millions, also don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also like it. As we learned, this is also important.
leave a comment
because we read them, and Mike reads them with a magnifying glass. So Mike, we were, since the beginning of the war, we have been first looking at Gaza after the horrible events of October 7th, and then the scene unfolded in which we thought, little Israel suddenly found itself in a pool of sharks in the Middle East, and they were all smelling our blood. And Netanyahu just marched on, but all our analysis of Gaza and Lebanon, the Houthis, the attacks from Syria and West Iraq, all of this was under the shadow of the rising hegemony of Iran, and so it was foreboding. Do you say it was forbidding? Both
foreboding. Yeah, no, you had it right.
It was looming on the horizon, and I have to tell you, whatever fight we had here, it looked like a gathering storm, a huge gathering storm of a nuclear Iran was looming over the horizon, and little David could do very little against this Goliath. And then we started doing it, and we had a clash here on this podcast when I thought we are going to miss the chance, and if the Democrats win the election, it will be gone, and we have to attack the nuclear Iran now. And you said it's impossible without the United States. So now the big question is the United States going to be on our side? Let's look at the big picture, and then we still have 2 months and a half until we are rid of this appeasement policy. But what are the chances now in your estimation?
I think that this is fantastic for the state of Israel. I think it's fantastic for the balance of power between Iran and the West. The strategic map of the Middle East changed once again dramatically in Israel's favor in one day, just like it changed when Israel decapitated Hezbollah. People still haven't, I think a lot of analysts of the Middle East have yet to catch up to how much the world changed when that happened. We were looking, Gadi, just a few months ago, I had a nightmare scenario in my mind, which was a super offense dominant regime of Iran. So offense dominant, again, it means having it's a military balance of power that favors offensive action. These drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles that Iran has, it can fire them off by either directly from Iran or through its proxies, and Israel has difficulty answering in a way that can end the fire. And I thought it was going to become super offense dominant because Iran would get a nuclear weapon. Iran would be shielded from attack by the United States. And so all of these conventional weapons that they're firing off with impunity would then be empowered further by this nuclear umbrella. That's what we were looking at a few months ago. The chance of that happening now has been reduced significantly, greatly. It's become unlikely that this is going to happen, I think. The balance of power shifted even under Biden, who was shielding Iran. Trump will not shield Iran. Now, he's not necessarily going to work hand in glove with Israel on military operations against Iran, because Trump is going to be reluctant to get directly involved in military action, but his gut feeling is pro-Israel. His gut feeling is anti-Iran. He regards Iran as the problem in the Middle East. He's aware. He worked on these issues for 4 years. He's aware of them, knows them inside and out, and all of his advisors will know it inside and out. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for Israel, and I also think there's an opportunity for Israel in the next 8 weeks, because Israel can attack now if it wants on Biden's watch and then Trump can come in and clean up the mess that's the resulting mess. Israel can hand Trump an opportunity for creative diplomacy from strength, from a position of strength that the Biden administration was incapable of imagining.
That is great news. I didn't think that there's an opportunity before Trump comes, because, and we've discussed this, we should write this down as a topic for the next show, because we have too much on our plate today. The sanctions or whatever it is that the Biden administration is planning for Israel in the interim, but clearly this is a change. This is a sea change, and this local scene is not just a local scene, as we have been saying, but when we say it, it sounds like we have too much of a stake in the game. This conflict can ignite a larger war than even a regional war, because the Russians and the Chinese are involved, and nuclear Iran would start a nuclear race in the Middle East. And now there is a chance to stop this. And I want to, maybe I'll put a link to this under our video. Mike, you and I had a chat with Secretary Mike Pompeo on my Hebrew podcast, Gatekeeper, after he left office. And we asked him what the difference was between the policy that the Trump administration had in the Middle East and the policy that he sees the Democrats implementing. And he said three things. One, Iran is the problem, not the solution. Secondly, you have to bypass the Palestinian veto on the peace process. And three, you need a force that would be large enough to have a credible threat in the region. And if this policy is implemented again, then for us, everything is changed. And, you know, when Netanyahu keeps saying we will stop them before they have a bomb, people have begun to be skeptical. They said, no, you can no longer stop them. You hear Ehud Barak say, Ehud Barak, former prime minister, an anti-Netanyahu agent of chaos in Israel now, saying, look, we have to start adjusting ourselves to a nuclear Iran, because this is a reality we can no longer stop. Now, if you have an American administration that is, you know, I saw this interview with Kamala Harris, and I was flabbergasted, because even Obama never said such a thing. She was asked, what if Iran tries to break to a nuclear weapon? What would you do? And she said, as president, and she said, I don't need to answer hypothetical questions. You know, this is this a hypothetical question? This is the question of policy you have on your, it's a hypothetical question. You know, The Onion once had a story that was entitled Hypothetical Question, Clearly Not Hypothetical. And the question was, these are two guys, they're hiking, and one says, Doug, hypothetically speaking, if Jane was into threesomes, would you consider me? So hypothetical questions, clearly not hypothetical in this case, and dodging this, you know, for people after this, how can the media, journalists in Israel, still root for Kamala Harris after that comment? Unbelievable. And I'll mention my answer to this question just very briefly, is that in their mind, the most important thing is coming back to the two-state solution track. And they think that, and rightly, that Donald Trump would never impose that on Israel. And they think that she will. And they believe the story that after a Democratic administration does that, then it will contain Iran. And we don't have to tell our listeners again that this is a fairy tale that the State Department is selling.
Totally a fairy tale. I want to change the subject to something completely frivolous for 1 second. But I want you to tell me something. I met recently some men from deep within the Israeli security establishment. Deep in. I won't say who. And you wouldn't know their names anyway, but you would know the type of people they are. And we spoke a little Hebrew, and I said "relebit," and they had no idea what I was talking about. And I had to explain it to them. They had never heard the acronym before. And when I said, I said, everybody knows what that is. How do you not know? And they said, well, we're busy with security matters.
Yeah, no, they're busy with security matters, and they are
Well,
clearly on one political side.
is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not. Look, that's not 100% clear to me. We didn't talk politics, but I was it's not clear to me that they're that
But
they're
you
on.
can assume that our viewers and
Oh,
listeners
so
remember
oh
what a relebet is.
relevant is anybody but BB, but said like it's like Trump derangement syndrome. It's BB derangement syndrome.
Exactly.
But it's an acronym in the form of that comes in the form of a disease, right? But I was surprised. This is not every Israeli knows what relevant is. This is there only people on the right? Is that?
Yeah, because people on the right are very much aware, like people on the right in the United States are very much aware of the Trump derangement syndrome. This is how the right explains to itself what is going on the left, and it sees it as a kind of derangement and not as an argument. So I would guess it has political leanings, and that bears on the last question we'll discuss today after we discuss Gallant, and I'm rushing on because I have someone else's podcast on which I am supposed to appear in half an hour. So Mike, why don't you start with Gallant before I dig ourselves into too many details?
Okay, I have my own take on Gallant, which is different than what I've heard anyone else say, and I'll be curious to know what you think. I think that I think the interpretation in the Israeli press that they're getting ready for Netanyahu's getting ready for the October 7th commission of inquiry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's total BS. The issue, the timing is really is a big tell. He did it on election day, and what Netanyahu knows is that the Biden administration, regardless of who won the election, has a campaign planned against him and against his coalition. And the campaign is going to focus on the two-state solution. I suspect it's going to have two prongs. One is a United Nations Security Council resolution enshrining the parameters for a two-state solution. It will lay out the parameters. Of course, it will have a few key lines in there about nothing is going to be decided until the two parties come to an agreement. But the effect is going to be to lay out what all of the terms of the agreement should be, and that will be one prong. The other prong is a wave of sanctions and administrative actions against West Bank settlers. And the major tool for this is going to be that executive order that Biden published in early February, giving the sweeping powers to the executive branch to sanction anyone on the West Bank who is carrying out activities that advance the settlement project and endanger a two-state solution. In their own minds, they see this is part of their legacy. It's very important to them. It's part of the progressive project is to preserve the two-state solution. They're also going to do this together with international partners. So Netanyahu sees this coming. It has a huge impact on Gaza because the two-state solution will look. They've always framed the Gaza, the day after question as revitalization of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, and Netanyahu is afraid that Gallant is not a reliable partner in this fight with the Americans. It's going to be the next 8 months between the Biden administration and Jerusalem are going to be very, very tense because of this plan of the Americans. And so Biden wanted a coalition that can stand Netanyahu wanted a coalition that could stand the fight with Biden.
Yeah, I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it's true. And it's not necessarily tied only to this one question. There have been speculations here that Gallant is a possible obstacle to a raid in Iran, and also that he would leak it to the Americans. This is a historical trauma that Bibi carries since when he
2012.
It's 2012, he and his then Minister of Defense, Ehud Barak, were allegedly planning an attack on Iran's nuclear project, and that was stopped by the head of the Mossad, who Meir Dagan, who, according to what we know, and I think he even bragged about it at one point, but I'm not sure. He went to Obama and alerted him to the fact, and the United States stopped Israel from doing it. So for Netanyahu, this was a big lesson in two ways. One, in his relations with the United States and the determination of Obama to prevent such things, and the other is that you can't trust the people that you are supposedly in command of, even if you are directly in command of, like the head of the Mossad. You can't trust them to implement your plans, to execute your plans, and they can be in cahoots with the United States. So this may be happening again, and we know that the Biden administration has been inviting Benny Gantz when he was in the cabinet, and then Yoav Gallant. And if you remember, just a few weeks ago, before the or in the midst of the Hezbollah affair, Netanyahu put a stop to, or prevented Gallant from accepting the invitation by the Biden White House to go to the United States. So obviously, you're right, Mike, and he sees him Gallant as a possible fifth column is maybe an exaggeration, but someone who is undermining him vis-a-vis the Americans. Also, remember, Gallant was almost always on the dovish side, and in that too, along with the Americans, about Rafa. And it's look, the press is now screaming bloody murder and the end of democracy. This is ridiculous. The prime minister has a policy. Say there's negotiations about the hostages, and there's a proposition on the table. Hamas is not accepting it. This is all the mediators, but they say that in order to have a deal, you need to give up the Philadelphia corridor. We discussed this at great length here. And then Gallant says, well, not necessarily. You're undermining. Maybe it's just a bluff in the negotiations. You can't have your Secretary of Security undermining the official position of the government. He should have been fired long ago, but he didn't. Netanyahu didn't fire him because Netanyahu is always mamlachti. He is always the exact opposite of the way the press portrays him, as narrowly self-interested. He sees the whole picture, and he did not want to clash directly with so many people. He's been trying to build a larger coalition, even paying a price like accepting Gideon Sa'ar again. And so he did this only after trying to work with an adversarial Minister of Defense for a long time.
I think it's fair to say that Israel Katz, as defense minister, is going to be much more responsive. I'm being polite here. Responsive to Netanyahu's demands or point of view. Of course, hanging over everything that we're saying is the perception in Israel and in the United States that Gallant is America's man. Now, the way they put it here, there was a lot of hand-wringing and rending of garments when Netanyahu fired Gallant in the pro-Israel community here. And it was pointed out time and again that Gallant is the only one in the government who maintained really cordial, good relations with the Americans. Of course, that is the problem. If you're Netanyahu and you're going to have a fight with Biden, you can't have your defense minister being more responsive to the Americans than to you.
Let me add one point very briefly, is that ever since the days of Ben Gurion, who is on the wall behind you, as we mention once in a while, the Ben Gurion's conception was that the Minister of Defense, usually himself, should be a civilian and not a military man, because if he comes from the upper echelons of the IDF, then he tends to be the representative of the IDF in the cabinet instead of the channel by which the civil government imposes its will on the military. And we saw how dangerous this was, because what defeated the reform last year, Mike, what defeated it was a threat by the army of insubordination. And Mr. Gallant, who has been understanding of the refuseniks, in the end crossed the Rubicon into politics at the head of the army instead of doing the opposite. And, you know, there was a dramatic moment in February where the first pilots said that they will stop coming to training if the reform comes through. And my friend Erez Tadmo spoke with Gallant, who was then already Minister of Security or Minister of Defense, as you call him. He spoke to him on the phone for 20 minutes. And then he called me and he said, this guy just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand this. Gallant, who promised in the primaries that he'll push for a reform, said he was going to talk to the refuseniks because it's important to understand them. And you have a mutiny in the army. The way to deal with a mutiny in the army is not listening, understanding, and hugging. The way to deal with a mutiny is telling those pilots that they will never see an F-15 Eagle again from close up, because they will only sit at the gate of the base and see the pilots going to work. And believe me, those people like their airplanes, like the Polish cavalry, like their horses. They would never part with them, no matter how automated drones are going to be. They want their horses. I don't know
that all of our listeners know that the last cavalry attack in ever was the Polish cavalry against the Russians, I believe, Russian machine guns. It didn't go well for the Poles. This is your reference.
For some reason that military analysts are still trying to decipher.
Yeah,
it didn't go well. It didn't go well. So when Gallant was fired, the opposition thought there was going to be a second Gallant night, because the Gallant night supposedly stopped the reform. The Gallant night was, I think it was the night between 26th and 27th of March. And on the 27th, the roof organization of labor unions threatened to strike, and many tycoons said they will also join in paralyzing the economy. And then the coalition began to fray. And in that evening, Netanyahu said, we are postponing the reform, or most of it. And it was almost over. There was one clause that they still tried to pass and surrendered in the end. Even, I mean, the Supreme Court won that last skirmish too, but everybody was expecting a Gallant night, and they don't get it. In their mind, Netanyahu is evil, and we're just waiting for the millions. They keep saying, what we need is 1 million people in the streets. But you have 5,000 people. How are you going to get 1 million? For them, like you said about like American politics, they know what good is, and they're just waiting for a minute for everybody to understand this self-evident truth that Netanyahu is a disaster. But we are in the midst of a war, and there is a minister of defense who is a defeatist, and there is a prime minister who keeps saying total victory, and is now seemingly winning that total victory. And there is a Gallant putting obstacles in his way, and he fired him. And I think this is testimony to the fact that Netanyahu himself feels far more confident. He feels that the larger public is with him, and that he has the political, what do you say, the political cachet in order to dismiss. You
may have the cash too, but that's something else.
Yeah, no, not really. That's a difference between him and Donald Trump. Of course, he's not poor. And this, I think, leads us directly to the last topic.
No. I want to highlight one thing that you said,
Sure.
which I think is really important. You touched on it just in passing, and that's that part of the conflict between Washington and Jerusalem in the next 8 weeks may be an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, or on their oil infrastructure, for example, or another attack. There may be another attack coming. I'm not sure where I would put the probability of it, but I have argued repeatedly, consistently over the last few years that Israel would not attack Iran's nuclear program alone. It would not attack it in the teeth of American opposition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I no longer believe that. I think the situation has changed so dramatically that we can now imagine a solo Israeli attack designed to set back the Iranian nuclear program. And you mentioned the 2012 contest between Meir Dagan and Netanyahu, in which Meir Dagan used the Americans against Netanyahu. He's at least positioning himself for every option so that he can exercise that option if he decides that it's necessary.
Yeah. Well, touch wood, because, I was so frustrated when we had this argument, because I thought we were with our backs against the wall and the clock ticking to an Iranian bomb, that we needed to take a gamble, even if it seemed reckless.
And what did I tell you?
Don't.
I said the wheel always turns.
Yeah.
It always turns.
Well,
never, ever feel that it's 5 minutes to midnight.
Unless it is.
No, even if it is.
What if the Democrats had won the election, Mike? We would have been in very, very serious trouble. Although, after the beheading of Hezbollah, I started saying here in the press, for the first time that I no longer think that a Kamala Harris 4-year term would lead to Israel's destruction, or would.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think so either.
I thought, but I did think so. I didn't think it would, but I think it could before we beheaded Hezbollah. That's how it looked, because I said 4 more years of Iran's rise to hegemony with a nuclear bomb. And remember, these are fanatics who can actually use it. That we were in existential danger. I think after the beheading of Hezbollah, our chances greatly improved, but now we are in a completely different world. However, if I may, the new scandal.
I'm sorry. I want to go back to our fight. No. I want to make one point, and then
I'm just a figurehead in trying to.
I'm a very uppity intern.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Here's the point I want to make, that the Biden administration has been facing in the Middle East increasingly has been facing a Middle East that does not conform to its ideology, just like it experienced in the domestic politics, that the electorate did not behave according to their theory of the electorate. The Middle East is not behaving according to their theory of the Middle East, and they're angry at the Middle East, and particularly at Netanyahu for not conforming to their theory of the case. That gap between their conception and reality was giving Israel more and more and more opportunities, and that was a very beautiful thing. And I think it would have continued.
That's very interesting.
Are you saying that just to move on, or do you actually?
No. I'm saying this because I will have to think about it, because because it explains much that has happened, not just much that can happen. And it's not really moving to a new topic when we speak of the scandal, because things are intertwined here. And I just said that Gallant is a representative of the army in the cabinet instead of the other way around. And the scandal that is now unfolding is supposedly over a leak. So what I want you to do, Mike, if you can, is recap the interpretation that you laid out in just a few sentences in our news bulletin, and then I will say what I think may be behind it, because the similarities with what is going on between Shabak, the security service, and Netanyahu is strikingly like the relations between the FBI and the first Donald Trump term around the affair of Russian collusion. And I'll try to explain that in a minute.
Okay, and I have my own slightly different interpretation, which I'll put up to make you angry. So in one or two sentences, there's a Shabak investigation of a leak out of the prime minister's office about the document. I don't know if this has been reported in the Israeli press because of all the restrictions, but externally it's been reported that there was a document that went to Der Bild, which was a handwritten document by Yahya Sinwar, and that this was a classified document, classified because of the way it was the way it was acquired, and the leaking of it to Der Bild endangered important sources of information, and at the same time scuttled a potential hostage deal that was in the works. So this is not just a simple security investigation, because there's the implication that the implication is that that Netanyahu may have ordered this in order to scuttle the deal. And so he is endangering lives or endangering important sources of intelligence in order to further his political agenda, and endangering the hostages. That's where all of this leads politically. I don't know how much all these dots have been. I haven't been following it closely. Have all these dots been? I'm sure that Ben Caspit and Nahum Barnea and so on, have they connected up all these dots to say that that's what's happened?
Yeah, they've connected them in a certain way to serve the narrative, but there's also a counter narrative, and I'm going to be careful because a lot of this is speculation at this point. Is that the things began when allegedly someone in the prime minister's name was fishing for the raw intelligence. And because they were feeling that the heads of the IDF intelligence were not giving them all the information.
And, that's interesting.
That is not this is not out of the blue, because on the night between the 6th and the 7th of October, let me remind you, they did not wake Netanyahu up. There were serious signs that an attack was imminent. They decided that it wasn't, and they can discuss it in the morning. And they did not. They compartmentalized it from their political superiors, from the Minister of Defense and from Netanyahu. And so Netanyahu has the feeling that the coup from the days of the reform is continuing. They're still holding back, and the way this is interpreted by many of us here on the right is that in their mind, this government is composed of crazies and messianic fanatics, and so they will light up the whole Middle East if you give them the raw material, and they misinterpret it. And so they withheld, the theory goes, they withheld this information because it could have started a war, which in the end it of course did. But so here's where it becomes tricky. The chiefs of the services, the IDF and the Shabak, may be worrying that Netanyahu and his agents were collecting incriminating information that would expose them as culprits in the total failure of that morning. So
this is where the Gallant story
exactly
and the leak investigation come together.
Exactly. And so now the interpretation, or that interpretation goes. It was advanced here by Yaakov Bardugo, a very well-sourced journalist. He said that what they are trying to do is a sort of they are now trying to investigate the prime minister in order to paralyze his ability to find out what they were up to. And this is why I said this may begin to look like a page from the Obama James Comey playbook, because in order to hide the penetration of the Trump campaign, when Trump fired James Comey, the Rod Rosenstein, I think it was, appointed a special counsel and paralyzed Donald Trump, who could no longer intervene in that investigation. So this is why some people have been calling this a coup. And there's another clue to this interpretation, because Netanyahu called Ronen Bar, the head of the Shabak, to his office after that. First of all, I have to say, Ronen Bar, the head of the Shabak, completely rejects any insinuations in the press that this is a coup or the continuation of a former coup. He was, of course, there also in the days of the reform. So he rejects this interpretation. But here's another clue, Mike. Netanyahu ordered him to the office and said, "You're investigating this leak? Here is a whole list of leaks that were by Gallant, among other people, that when Netanyahu fired Gallant, he said, this is also in order to stop the leaks." So there is a whole list of leaks saying, well, if you're investigating leaks, I have ordered investigations of all these leaks and nothing happened. And he leaked, should I say? The letter is official, and it was given to the press without
published,
the
I think we would say, yeah.
Without the secret supplement of the actual leaks. But clearly the prime minister is hinting that there is a very one-sided attitude towards the leak, or as one brilliant pundit in Israel put it, there is great irony in all the leaks about the investigation of the leak. All the press is reporting from army sources the investigation of the leaks. It's like it's completely ridiculous. So some people, Yaakov Bardugo is one example, are saying this is an attempted coup. This is an attempt to, and the end game that they are, I mean, that's the nightmare scenario. I'm not saying that this is actually has been proven in any way, but the nightmare scenario is that they are going to say that the prime minister has a conflict of interest and cannot command the Shabak in the midst of a war, and therefore should be incapacitated by our legal system and removed from office. So,
well, this is fascinating. This just got much more interesting than I realized. This is really, because I see all the connections. Let me give you another interpretation and see, get your reaction. I think, because I talked to some people from deep in the security state, and not in any depth about this at all, but I did pick up that this particular leak that's being investigated is a very serious one. That it really did endanger security assets, which is quite different than the kind of leaks that Gallant the kind of leaks that you're describing, where Gallant calls up Barak Ravid and says, we need the Philadelphia corridor. We don't need the Philadelphia corridor. We have all kinds of sensors that can do the job. And the Egyptians and those tunnels weren't really in use anyway. We know that. But that's just backgrounding the press. It's not a leak that endangers security assets. So it seems to me possible that sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, that this really is what they say it is, but there's so much tension. It's the relations between all these people are like relations between a man and a wife when they're 3/4 of the way to divorce, and everything is deteriorated, and you know, and the man says, why did you buy that brand of coffee? And then it sparks off a huge fight, because every little conflict touches on every other conflict, and it explodes, and you have to walk on eggshells. I think there's a possibility that's what's going on here, that this really is a serious security investigation about a serious infraction. Those things happen.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But given all the tensions and all the stakes, there is at least a lot piggybacking on that. And I think that Netanyahu's list of leaks, some of them were very damaging to security. So if I don't know about exposing sources, but certainly endangering the hostages, because if you have a position on the hostages and someone is undermining it, and you're trying to play poker with Yahya Sinwar, then you're endangering and secondly, you know, when this erupted, and of course the Kaplan demonstrators rushed to the street, everybody out to the street, this is an emergency. Most people in Israel just said, that's the new excuse then. Everything is always there's always a new scandal that is decisive and means that Netanyahu has to go. Mike, we're out of time. We won't have a time for the dumbest take on the news, and I actually burned mine with quoting this journalist about the leaks. So I'll leave it to you to wrap up and give your last final comments on everything.
I just give another comment on this. I find this whole question of the raw intelligence versus the more what would we call it? Finished product really interesting. I encountered that a lot when I worked in government. In the White House, I was responsible for the Middle East, and I had working for me a guy from the CIA who was just fantastic. And he would give me the finished products from the CIA and the intelligence community, but he also would give me stuff out of the raw feed, because we all had the raw feed, but it's a fire hose of information that's coming at you, and you really do need expertise in going through it. It's impossible often to decide, you know, whether a source is really reliable or not. It takes time, experience with this material to understand it. But after a couple of years of doing it, I came to very different conclusions, often from the intelligence community, about what was going on based on my read of the raw feed. You really need both, because the intelligence analysts make mistakes, and because they should be open to being questioned. Why did you ignore this? Why did you ignore that? There's no such thing as anyone has a perfect understanding of anything. And there are always blind spots, and always areas where you just have to make a judgment, and you just have to say, I don't have enough information to know, but here's what I assume is happening. And then you go forward. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And we'll have to see how this thing unfolds. I have to say, in conclusion, that the incapacitating theory is dismissed by some wise commentators as saying you cannot do that to a prime minister with such standing at such a crucial moment and invested with so much public confidence. So
I'm going to make a prediction. Because I actually believe the thing that I put forth tentatively. I think this was a real investigation about a real thing that people were genuinely concerned about, purely for security reasons. And I believe that it will be understood over time to be that, and this whole thing will blow over. So 2 weeks from now, we won't be talking about this. That's what I think.
Or as ינון Magal said, Tam Idan Netanyahu. Netanyahu's era is over once again. Thank you for bearing with us in this long conversation. Things are very interested. Mike, am personally looking forward to our next conversation, because there's just too much to digest, and hopefully we'll start doing this on time. But bear with us. Events are so turbulent that sometimes it doesn't make sense to do our show on the right time slot, because it would become obsolete within minutes. So we conclude here, and hopefully next Tuesday we will see you here on Tablet's Israel Update. Thanks for watching.